What?
We're just two adults that are attracted to each other. And whatever happens stays
I'm gonna make
between
you shut
us.
up.
Here are your messages, please.
Welcome to Storyflix. In this video, we will explain Sleeping with My Student. This movie tells the story of a woman who discovers her vacation fling with a charming boy was no accident when he targets her in a deadly scheme. Can she escape from the boy's plan? Let's find out in Sleeping with My Student. Sleeping with My Student begins with flashes of the Johnson family's past in the car. Felix Johnson was driving, even though at that time his emotions were running high because he was having a big fight with his wife, June. They ignored their crying child in the back seat. June is furious when she learns that her husband has been having an affair with a woman she knows, but Felix denied it. Felix said that June was jealous and too naive, that she often couldn't think with common sense and always obeyed her feelings. June couldn't hold all these emotions anymore. The outburst of anger fused with the flames of jealousy, creating a crazy idea in her mind to end her life with Felix. Without thinking, she was desperate to grab the steering wheel. The car drove recklessly on a deserted street at night until it finally lost control and hit a car parked on the shoulder of the road. Felix and June are covered in blood and unconscious, leaving their crying child alone. 17 years later, a middle-aged woman named Kathy is in a luxury hotel room with her two friends, Megan and Stacy. The three of them are celebrating the promotion of Kathy, who is now a school principal. All three work as teachers at a high school. Kathy and her friends were enjoying a glass of wine when one of Kathy's friends felt hot. It turned out that the air conditioner in the room didn't work. Kathy then called the hotel operator to request someone to fix the air conditioner. Not long after, a hotel employee came. The room boy's name is Ian, and because he is young and quite handsome, Megan and Stacy openly seduce him. Meanwhile, Kathy acted normal because she thought Ian was just a young man who was probably the same age as her daughter. That night, Kathy was sitting alone by the pool. Then Ian suddenly came up and asked her to swim with him. Kathy refused, and Ian went into the pool alone. After diving for a few minutes, Ian's body never appeared on the surface. Kathy tried to call out to Ian, but he didn't budge. Kathy then went into the water. Spontaneously, Ian rose to the surface. He surprised Kathy and laughed at her expression that looked panicked and worried. Ian then apologized to her and said that he was used to diving like that, so that his body and mind relaxed again. It was awkward between them. Ian stood very close, but Kathy didn't try to walk away either. The charming face of the young boy seemed to be pulling her closer to him. Kathy tried to keep her senses, repeatedly reminding her wild side that the handsome young man in front of her now more than deserved to be her son than her lover. But Ian seemed to feel the same spark. He continued to seduce Kathy with a charming smile and a gaze that could trap Kathy's desire in the same lustful grasp. After getting wet in the pool, they then went to Kathy's room for drinks. Ian tried to rub the beautiful woman, but Kathy looked away. Ian didn't just give up. He came back to Kathy, pushing her against the wall. Kathy felt her heart beat faster, along with the discomfort in her sensitive area, as she felt the warmth of Ian's breath on her cheek. When the young man's mouth pressed against hers in one swift motion, Kathy's defenses broke down. However, unbeknownst to Kathy, Ian recorded their intercourse with his cell phone, which he secretly placed near a lamp facing the bed. The next morning, Kathy wakes up in her bed alone. For some reason, she felt relieved after having a one-night stand with Ian. Elsewhere, it was revealed that Ian was not an employee at the hotel where Kathy and her friends were staying. He deliberately disguises himself as a hotel clerk to get close to Kathy. Arriving at the house, Kathy met her daughter named Bree. Bree welcomes her mother and thinks she looks different after coming home from vacation with friends. Elsewhere, Ian also just arrived at his house. In contrast to Kathy, who was well received, Ian got scorned by his stepfather. The two of them often quarreled because Ian hated his stepfather, who was rude to his mother. Ian then met his mother in the room. He loved his mother, who suffered from mental disorders after the death of his biological father in an accident several years ago. A few days passed, Kathy started the new school year with a new career as a school principal. When she and Bree walked into the school's front yard, she accidentally saw Ian's figure among the students. Her steps stopped, but she thought it was just a hallucination. Bree enters her classroom and chooses the very back seat. A few minutes later, Ian entered the classroom and immediately took his place next to Bree. Ian then began showing the same friendliness and concern he had shown to Kathy. As the days passed, Bree and Ian's relationship grew closer. Bree felt comfortable when Ian was around her. She even told about Ian to her mother. Kathy's happiness then turns to worry when she receives a mysterious message. It turned out that the message contained a photo of her underwear that she wore when having sex with Ian at the hotel. Kathy assumed that Ian intentionally sent the message. The next day, Kathy visited Bree's class and chatted with her teacher. The students entered the classroom one by one and took their seats. How surprised Kathy was when she saw Ian enter the class and sit next to Bree. Ian was actually at her school. He smirked mischievously at her as she looked at him in disbelief. Kathy went back to her office and began investigating all the information about Ian through the files at the school and other teachers. A security guard stationed at the school said that Ian was a transfer student who had problems with his behavior. He was expelled from his old school. Kathy then realized that Ian was not as sweet a young man as she thought. She then wondered if Ian's presence at her school was just a coincidence. Kathy then went to Bree and Ian, who were sitting in the garden. Bree introduced her mother to Ian. Kathy, who didn't want Ian to disturb her daughter, blatantly showed that she didn't like him and pulled Bree away. Arriving in the car, Bree was very upset that her mother had been so rude to the boy she liked, but Kathy stays silent. Arriving at home, Ian then showed his mother the news headline of a newspaper. He said that the woman in the newspaper was Kathy Sullivan, who had snatched her family's happiness. Kathy is a woman who became Ian's late father's mistress and the cause of her mother's suffering to this day. Ian swore to his mother to take revenge on Kathy. Kathy's ex-husband, Ben, visits her house and takes Bree out to dinner. Ian secretly follows them to a restaurant. In the restaurant, Bree saw Ian and intended to approach him. Bree then introduced Ian to her father. Bree and her father finally came home. Ben said to Kathy that Bree met a young man at the restaurant while they were eating. Ben said that the young man was named Ian and looked like a good young man. But Kathy refuted Ben's words and convinced him that Ian wasn't what Ben thought and he wasn't the right boy for their daughter. Kathy then took a knife from the drawer and quietly went to school in the middle of the night. She headed down the hallway of Bree's classroom towards the lockers of the students. She opened Ian's locker using the spare key, slipped the knife into the boy's locker. The next day, a security guard called Ian while he was in the classroom. The officer took him to Kathy, who was waiting for him in front of his locker, where the officer found a knife there. Possession of sharp weapons is a serious offense in schools. The officer will never tolerate students who have it, whatever the reason. But Ian denied that the knife was not his and insisted that someone had put it there on purpose to set him up. He looked at Kathy, who was standing restlessly in her place. Kathy then interrogates Ian in her office and tells him to stay away from Bree. But Ian instead threatens Kathy by showing a videotape of their intercourse at the hotel. He demanded a sum of money from her in exchange for the video and threatened to spread an obscene video if she did not comply. Kathy was angry and called a security guard to kick Ian out because he had been expelled from school. Ian rushed out of school and went home. Ian, who is still filled with anger, is even more furious when he finds out that his stepfather often beats his mother when he is not home. He then took a kitchen knife and stabbed his stepfather in the back. He also took a baseball bat and beat him to death. Suddenly, the doorbell rang. Ian was very surprised to see Gina, his classmate who seems to like him. Gina is very worried after Ian is expelled from school. She sneaked out of the school and followed him, but it seems Ian never liked her and asked Gina to get out of his house. Gina then accidentally saw Ian's stepfather's corpse in the kitchen. Ian's demeanor then turned violent. He threatens Gina that he will not hesitate to kill her if she reports his actions to anyone. Gina finally left Ian's house. The next morning, when the class had not started, Bree walked down the school corridor in a crowd of other students. Ian, who quietly returned to school, emerged from a door, grabbed Bree's arm, and led her to skip school and go to a cafe. Gina catches Ian and Bree going together, but then Ian threatens her with a signal to keep her mouth shut. Kathy, who looked very panicked, then came to class after class to ask about her daughter, but no one knows where Bree is. Suddenly, Gina approached them and said that Bree went with Ian. Kathy immediately contacted Ian and asked where Bree was. Ian said that he was currently with Bree and he demanded a ransom or he will hurt her. Ian then took Bree to a rural area that was quite far from the city. Bree began to notice the difference in Ian's attitude, which had now turned violent. She asked where they were going, but Ian instead snapped at her and got angry. Ian then told Bree everything. Ian and Bree arrived at an empty farm. He drags her into an old building, which is the house where he lived before his father died. Bree tried to escape from Ian by kicking him. She managed to escape down the dark alleys in the house, but Ian managed to corner her into a room that had no other way out. Kathy arrived at the location Ian had set for their meeting. She took Megan along and told her to stay in the car just in case and call the police immediately. Kathy rushed into the old building with the ransom Ian demanded. She was very relieved to finally see Bree again. Ian then reveals the real reason why he did all this to Kathy. He told Kathy to remember an accident that happened 17 years ago. The accident killed his father, Felix Johnson, and left his mother mentally ill. Kathy was very shocked to hear all these harsh facts. Seeing her mother's reaction, Bree finally knew that all of Ian's words were facts and felt disappointed in her mother. Kathy then apologized to her daughter and admitted that she divorced her ex-husband because she had an affair with Ian's father. Ian then pointed a gun at Bree, intent on killing her. With all the intuition of a mother to protect her child, Kathy immediately ran to Ian and tried to grab his gun. Ian tried to dodge Kathy, but they fell, which killed Ian instantly. The scene then changed to show June Johnson, who was sitting pensively holding a teddy bear, waiting for the return of his son. The film ends.